Good morning. This is Daniela Caruso. I am the director of the Center for the Study of Europe here at Boston University. Today, we are starting a series of interviews with several consuls general who are stationed here in Boston and represent different governments of the European Union and more broadly, Europe. The point of this series is to explore the concept of solidarity at the time of COVID-19, a concept that is moral, legal, and political, and to see how this concept has been interpreted in different member states of the European Union. The consuls have, of course, complete liberty to decide how to engage with this concept, depending on their official responsibilities and their personal inclinations. Today, we are delighted to interview the Consul General of Greece, Stratos Efthymiou. The Consul General, Stratos Efthymiou, has had a distinguished diplomatic career for many years. Before being in Boston, he was at the Greek embassy in Ankara and then in Moscow. These days, besides being a full-time diplomat here, he is also a researcher at Harvard University. He participates in the scholars program of the Weatherhead Center at Harvard University, where he studies such important matters as the refugee crisis and the rise of populism in Europe. We are delighted to have him with us today. The interviewer, I have the pleasure to introduce this interviewer, Professor Vesko Garcevic, who is a professor of the practice of diplomacy and international relations here at Boston University. He has also had a wonderful career as a diplomat, being involved in such complicated and interesting issues as the dissolution of what used to be the Republic of Yugoslavia. In particular, he has served as ambassador of the state of Montenegro with several organizations, including NATO and the OSCE in Vienna, and also served as ambassador of Montenegro in Belgium, Luxembourg, and the Netherlands. I am delighted to have Vesko and Stratos today engage in a conversation on the topic of the day, solidarity at the time of COVID-19. Please, gentlemen. Go ahead.
Thank you, Daniela. Thank you for giving us a chance to have discussion about very topical issue with General Consul from Greece. Stratos, I hope that I may call you Stratos from now on during our interview. As you mentioned, the purpose of this interview is to discuss with you, what Greece, and not only Greece, but the EU, have been doing in order to address the crisis. But let's begin from the local point of view, let's say. So let's discuss how the pandemic has impacted the work of diplomats. It has impacted the work and the life of everybody of us. As you very well know, we from the universities, we teach online, we exercise remote teaching. Then I can imagine that it must have impacted work of diplomats too. A couple of days ago, I saw that Consuls General from Boston had a video conference to discuss their cooperation and work together. So can you explain us how it looks like, how is it like these days to be a diplomat here in Boston?
So it's a more virtual reality than usually. We have moved most of our services online, and we are doing a lot of digital work. Actually, we're trying to reform and transform the way we are working and proceed with digital transformation mechanisms. As you might guess, under an emergency situation, we cannot do business as usual. The safety of the citizens and of the persons who are visiting the consulate, but also of my staff, are a priority. So we have decided to continue our services, but we will do only emergency cases. We cannot do business as usual, issue visas, passports, do all the consular things that are not urgent at the time of an emergency. So, for example, if somebody hasn't declared his wedding for the last 5 years, it's not the time to do it now during the coronavirus crisis. and you know, people often don't get the sense of urgency. So we had to really cancel all our scheduled appointments, and we are re-examining every appointment and every case case by case. Of course, we are 24/7 accessible through an emergency phone, through our emails, and there is always somebody at the consulate, but we don't do events anymore at the consulate. We do virtual meetings. We are a consulate which is very active, one of the most active consulates in the city when it comes to cultural and scientific events. Unfortunately, we cannot go as planned. This week we would have our Boston Marathon wreath ceremony, where we bring wreaths from Greece for the Boston Marathon winners, but now everything is cancelled. And at the same time, what is a positive aspect of this crisis is that it brought the European consulates together. Normal circumstances, we meet occasionally, once or twice every 6 months. Right now we have a chat group. We do teleconferences, we do a weekly conference call, and we are in a very close cooperation in order to exchange information about all the things that matter for our countries and for our citizens. For example, we constantly exchange information on the available flights to Europe, on the decisions of the local authorities. We made a common démarche to the governor's office so that our consulates have access and freedom of movement in case of a shutdown, as the Vienna Convention for the diplomatic and consular relations provides for. So we are coordinated at the European level. And of course, each of us is coordinating through different means this time with one's own embassy. So, you know, many changes, much more work from the house. I mean, it's important to stay, you know, isolated, not to multiply social contacts. So if one of my employees is at the office, I'm not going to be at the office. I don't want to. I want to cut any possible spreading effects. So that's, you know, that's the challenges we are faced with. The biggest challenge will be to gradually phase towards the new normalcy, to start serving more citizens while we will be getting out of the crisis. And nobody knows how this new normalcy will be, when we will get out of the crisis. So we will need to think, and I'm thinking, how we will do more things from distance and how we will work in a safer way.
Stratos, thank you for this. I would like to draw attention of people who are not familiar with what Greece has been doing in order to address the crisis of the pandemic. You know, your country has praised for being very, how to say, efficient compared with other EU members particularly. But for example, comparing to Belgium and the Netherlands, which have a similar population, Greece has much less fatalities and less cases than these two countries. So can you explain us what made Greece so successful? What your government has been doing in order to address the pandemic? And when you compare what Greece has been doing with Massachusetts, do you see some similarities or and difference?
Well, Greece has started to come out of a 10-year financial crisis that battered its economy and its public health system. So we started this crisis with one of the lowest per capita ICU units in Europe. So we understood very quickly that, and the example of Italy woke us up very early, that if we don't take extreme measures, we would face the same, if worse, situations. So very fast we created teams of science and experts who have the first say when public policy is being formed. So Greece was probably one of the first countries to shut down its cities. We shut down not all non-essential business after 4 days. 4 days after the first death. It took 18 days for Italy and 30 days for Spain to shut down their cities after the first death. And we were among the first to ban public activities, football matches. A clear example is the Carnival, which is a big Greek tradition. Every at the end of February, thousands and tens of thousands of persons get out of the streets in Patras and other big cities of Greece. And the Greek government this year decided to ban all the activities, and that was very that saved thousands of lives, because you see what happened in New Orleans and in Louisiana with the Mardi Gras festival, and that proliferated the spreading, and now Louisiana has the highest mortality rate in the country. And if you combine this thing with all the other problems like obesity or other issues, inequality, unequal access to the public health system, you have the perfect storm. So this didn't happen in Greece, which is now in shutdown. If you go out without a permission, you will get a fine. It's a strict shutdown. It's not like here in Massachusetts. Here it is an advisory. So people are advised not to get out, and non-essential businesses is closed, but I can still see some young persons at the courts playing football, or guys cycling in teams of 5 or 6. These things, you cannot see them anymore in Greece. And you know, all the way the government is taking more and more measures. For example, this week is the week of the Greek Easter, 1 week after the Catholic Easter, which is the biggest celebration in Greece, bigger than Christmas. So everybody goes to the countryside, to their villages, islands, and the government stepped in to ban all these transports. It has a cost, but we cannot afford letting all these persons spread the virus to their villages and to their islands, where the public health system has no capacity to support them. So at the same time, we try to beef up our public health system. We had 560 ICU units and ventilators. Right now we are approaching 1,000, but we will probably won't need them, because the public health system has responded very well. We have less than 100 deaths today. I think we have 199 deaths and 2,140 cases for a population of 10 million, which is one of the lowest per capita in Europe, compared to Belgium. I think they have thousands of deaths, and so we have so far tried to learn from the lessons of our neighbors, and it's quite surprising how well we did. But we gave, we focused on science. We let the experts uh, have the influence they should in this very difficult time. And we took very strict measures because we don't have the capacities to deal with a crisis such as Massachusetts or other states. Of course, this will have a huge impact on our economy. We are very much dependent on tourism, especially during the crisis. The percentage of tourism on the national GDP increased a lot. So, and the period where we have most of our tourists is from May to September. So I think at least 2/3 of our we will lose 2/3 of our tourists. So this will have tremendous and very bad effects on our current account deficit and on local economies, on the island economies, on the real estate that is connected to tourism. So right now we are trying to form a strategy for the day after. But at the same time, this is an opportunity. This pandemic is an accelerator. It is a catalyst for many changes and for many things that we should have done all these years. So we are trying to digitalize our economy. We have wasted a lot of time during the last decades and years, but we are catching up. So during the last month, we have announced many services that will be done through internet without a physical presence of the citizens. Our educational system has moved to distance learning and e-learning. The public TV is offering also lessons. So even if you are at an island where you don't have good internet, you can, and you are a pupil of third grade, you can watch the public TV and you can watch a teacher giving a lesson. So there are many good things that happen in this terrible time. I think that our public health system will come out stronger since there is now much more awareness on the importance of having a public health system. But we will all gonna suffer from financially from this thing. And the other good thing is that during this crisis, Greece is inside the hard the center of the EU. We are under the same European umbrella. We managed to remain inside the Eurozone, so we will get advantage of all the European measures, of the decisions of the European Central Bank. And there were two very good decisions of the European Central Bank. The first is that the European Central Bank has decided to buy Greek bonds. So that was not the case until recently. And also another very important decision was that the European Central Bank relaxed its rules, and from now on it will consider taking Greek debt as collateral. That means that Greece will, for the first time, take part in the quantitative easing program of the European Central Bank. So all these years that Mario Draghi did the expansive monetary policy and he bought public debt and he did quantitative easing, Greece could not take part. Although we badly needed it, we could not because our bonds didn't have an investment grade. During this crisis, we managed to overturn these decisions, and so we are starting. We will face the crisis at the same starting point with many other European economies. Unfortunately, more exposed to tourism than others, but it was also an opportunity to try to improve the image of the country. since there is internationally, there are many articles about how Greece did during this crisis. Anyone who wants to learn more, I would suggest you Google Bloomberg, Greece coronavirus, Al Jazeera, Greece coronavirus, New York Times, Independent. So sometimes a crisis, provided that it is managed in a wise way, it is an opportunity to also try to correct or rebrand your international image. And this is at a time where Greece is faced with another very serious issue, which is the refugee issue and the pressure from our eastern border. So only 1 month ago, Turkey used refugees as weapons, and they tried to push them towards the Greek borders, and we had to protect our borders. We had to protect the European borders, and for reasons of public health and for reasons of security. So this is an issue which will go on, and during this crisis, another challenge was to really protect the refugee camps at the islands and in mainland, because if you have contamination in these refugee camps, which eventually at some point you will have, there is there are many dangers for the health of the refugees, but also of the entire population. So in the 3 or 4 cases where we had this this issue, we quarantined the place, and we did very fast checks, and we isolated the positive cases. So it's many crises at a time, but that's what this is what the European Union is about.
Yeah, you just explained how Greece proved to be efficient when it was needed, when it is needed in a time of crisis, this crisis, and you highlighted that policies and situations vary in European member states. As you mentioned, Belgium, I can confirm that Belgium has around 4,000 deaths so far, and is very heavily affected, as well as Netherlands, which are both considered within the EU as countries that have like a very good public health system, but definitely they've not found the most efficient way to address the crisis. So this brings me to the question about the European Union and European member states and their solidarity. A couple of days ago, I read how one of high senior ranking official of one of a European Union member state said that the European solidarity died with the first victim of coronavirus. You mentioned here how you guys here in Boston, representatives of the European Union member states, are cooperating, and that crisis brought you close to one another. Can you see this happening in the EU? As you know, European finance ministers to agree to a package of measures about to help European member states after the crisis. Your prime minister backed a proposal for the European Union or for EU countries to jointly purchase patent rights for new vaccine and rapid tests for the detection of coronavirus. So do you think that initiatives like this will be more present in the EU? How do you see the European Union policy in this regard?
Yeah, I think that, first of all, let's remind that there is no European public health policy. So public health is a responsibility of the member states. That being said, this is simply too important issue for the European Commission to ignore it. And I'm sure that learning from this crisis, the EU will adopt a European strategy on public health. As far as the patents, I think that was a very clever suggestion on the behalf of the Greek Prime Minister, because we need to, instead of competing for the patents and for the vaccines, we need to join our forces and secure the safety of the European population, because Germany won't be safe if Austria is not safe. Austria won't be safe if Italy is not safe. The only way to make them safe is to have is to abolish the Schengen rules, which is not something that nobody wants. So I think there should be a European policy on patents, and on eventually an international policy on these patents, because this is a pandemic. This is not a simple thing. This is a crisis of historic proportions. This is probably the most important global crisis after the Second World War. So it will fundamentally change the way economies are working. It will have an impact on international cooperation. So the EU should step in, and together with international organizations like the United Nations, the Food and Agriculture Organization, there are many issues pertaining to food security. Also with the World Health Organization, with the Monetary Fund for dealing with the issues of defaults, and of course with the World Trade Organization, which will have to deal with the patents, because once a vaccine is discovered, I think it should be accessible to the whole world. Of course, the companies should take some money for the research and for the costs, but it is an issue of world public health. So it has to be dealt in this way. Otherwise, forget globalization, forget the level of interdependence we have seen so far in our economies. The global production chains will be profoundly impacted. So coming back to Europe, another suggestion my Prime Minister undersigned was the adoption of Corona bonds, or the issuing of common European debt. I think that we are not there yet, but this is how the European Union goes on. From crisis after crisis, we learn from our mistakes and we go on, and it is a history of compromises. And I think there was an agreement last week. Maybe it was not the ideal agreement, but there has always to be a compromise, because otherwise the agreement won't be able to be implemented. So there is a first package of aid focused on public health. There will be also another package of aid focused on the reconstruction of the Greek economy. And at the same time, I'm glad that to see that the European Central Bank has stepped in, and Christine Lagarde has said that she will do whatever it takes to provide the necessary liquidity in the market. And as this situation unfolds, we will see more and more measures. Greece managed also to, because of the Greek crisis and of the lack of trust towards Greece, because of all the issues we saw, we were forced to have a financial straitjacket. So every year we had to have enormous surpluses, which wouldn't let us invest and recover. So during this crisis, we managed to see some of these obligations waived, so that we can invest our surpluses and deal with this crisis. At the same time, there are some peripheral issues concerning the EU, which are important each on its own way. For example, I read yesterday that Bulgaria decided to join the euro. This is, for many years they were hesitant, but I think that, they see that if they are part of the eurozone, they will have more say in what is going on inside the eurozone. They will have more access to financing. That's one thing. At the same time, the European Commission gave its green light. The European Council gave its green light to North Macedonia and to Albania, so who will start accession negotiations. That is an important step for Europe. Nobody noticed it, but it is important. At the same time, North Macedonia became a member state of NATO. So these are small things that pass unnoticed, not by somebody who is an expert on the Balkans like you, Ambassador, but I think that the European Union, although it is not perfect, it is a very useful organization. It is our community, and we need it to be there to always improve, learn from its crises. Otherwise, see what is going on anywhere else.
Yeah, my last question, departing from where you stopped, tell me, when you look in the future after the crisis, though now I think it's a very popular question for everybody, though we don't know how it will look like after the crisis, but we can have your own understanding of the world after this crisis. How do you see the EU after the pandemic? How do you think that the EU is going to be more coherent? Do you think that EU member states will become more solidar between one another? And do you think that a more globalizing world will learn how vulnerable, but at the same time interconnected we are, that challenges like this one, not caused by individual national policies? Do you think that this will contribute to the global cooperation of the EU and as a global organization, which means first of all the EU and then the world, in brief?
Well, they are both connected. As far as the EU, it remains to be seen, and it also depends on I cannot guess it, but I think that it is such an historic crisis that the EU has to step in, and that the EU countries have to support each other. This is the history of the EU. The EU was born out of the flames of the Second World War. Former enemies decided to start common production of very important goods. So what will Germany do if Italy is not part of the EU, or if the Italian economy is not sustainable? What will the Netherlands do if the world trade and the European trade collapses? So we will need to protect the cohesion of the EU, the cohesion of the societies of the EU, and the cohesion of the EU as an organization. And my feeling is, I'm not a pessimist, but my feeling is that it is a crisis of historic proportions that the EU leadership cannot ignore. Of course, how we will deal with this crisis right now, it will have a profound impact on the future. Is Germany going to step in and take the role of in the international relations theory, we have the notion of the benevolent hegemon, or we could say the leader. Will they step in and take their role, or will they, stay aside? I saw with satisfaction that the French-German axis has started to work after after many years again, and it should work if we want the EU to start working again. But there is a profound need of solidarity, of more bold measures. We cannot let countries that were so much that were, the victims of this thing, which is not an asymmetric threat. This is a symmetric threat. I mean, the Italian economy is really battered from this thing. The Spanish economy, the French economy, and it's not their responsibility. So there have to be European measures, and everything will depend on how we will move forward from the internal divides we have in the European Union between North and South, between West and East, between liberals and more authoritarian countries. At the same time, I see that there will be a break or a stop in the globalization as we have seen it so far. We had already seen this trend because of the trade negotiations, and we could see the first signs of protectionism, trade wars between the US, Europe, China, but I think that because of this crisis, more European countries and more countries in the world will realize that it is important to have a strategic national production, for example, of masks, of public health equipment. I mean, it is inconceivable that the United States imports masks from China. I mean, there are things that the EU and every country should be able to take care of. Imagine if this comes back again. So I think that there will be a lot of reflection on how deeper this interconnection, this global interconnection can go. But I would guess that there will be some renationalization of the production and some adjustment of the world production chain. But it is more important than ever to support international institutions like the Food and Agriculture Organization. This is going to be very critical. If this crisis persists, we will have severe problems. Combine this crisis with the climate change and the drought in Africa, and all the problems, we will have issues. Countries that are major producers of agricultural products, such as Vietnam, Kazakhstan, Russia, Ukraine, have stopped exporting part of their national production. In the long term, this will have huge problems, because in Italy people cannot collect agricultural products because there are no immigrants from Eastern Europe or from other countries. The same goes in Greece, elsewhere. So Food and Agriculture Organization, IMF, World Health Organization, the United Nations, the EU. This is a time of cooperation, and the world needs leadership. I'm not sure whether we have it, but we definitely need it.
Okay, thank you, Stratos. Difficult time as for leaders with vision. Hopefully, we're gonna get leaders with vision after this crisis. And if we may conclude, what is needed, more cooperation among countries at the global level to address global challenges. Some of them you rightly outlined, and then the generations to come have to with them. It's up to us to give them better world to deal with or to work to live in. Thank you, Stratos, again for having been with us. I appreciate very much. As you know, you will get the opportunity to review this interview, and then if you are fine with the interview, we will share the interview with the Boston University community. Thank you once again.
It was an honor and a pleasure, as always.
That's been wonderful. Thank you so much for touching on such important themes. I like in particular the theme of redemption of the image of a country that during prior crises had been kind of blamed as inefficient and ineffective. And I think that image has been restored thanks to this particular crisis. What's also become obvious is that dealing with crises as if they were local phenomena, such as the refugee crisis at the border, is something that no longer holds in the present situation. All crises, in fact, have a global dimension. And as you said, the catalyst provided by this situation is one that will probably lead us to rethink fundamental patterns of redistribution on a global scale. Thank you so much, General Counsel. We really appreciate it. Thank you so much, Professor Garcevic. Thank you all from the Center for the Study of Europe at Boston University. Goodbye.